This is a bad fucking idea. What the fuck? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Beanie wearing gaming man here. I just wanted to make a quick video letting you all know that I hate each and every one of you. Every time I have to read your comments, look at your faces, I'm just inundated with the most vile, vitriolic, idiotic thoughts. How any of you can think any of the things you think is so beyond me. It just never ceases to amaze me. So this video is going to be a response to Top Hat Gaming Man. And you know, I started YouTube way back when. YouTube was more old school, it was younger then. And it's sort of like, back then you had the option to do response videos. You could literally, like, it was an option. You had a little drop down and you could choose, like, this video is a response, and then, you know, you can search for, like, what video you're responding to, or you could just click on the video and put, like, I am responding to this video or whatever. But, you know, in lieu of the politically correct type, they got rid of it. They got rid of that because, you know, people's feelings and whatever. But Top Hat Gaming Man, he's not a person like that. Rather the opposite. But we're not really trying to ruffle his feathers, per se. I do disagree with him on a couple things, but nothing major. But I thought it was worth discussing, so we're gonna get into it. So our topic for today is emulation. What's your opinion of it? Where do you fall on it? Do you think it's immoral, and anytime it's brought up, you shame the person for having been so dumb as to bring it up? Do you prefer the authentic experience, and only the authentic experience, so you are completely closed off to emulators? Or do you only play emulators, and you think collectors are stupid for not playing emulators, and therefore they drive the prices up and whatever? Or do you mix? Do you use authentic machines and also emulate? What's your take on it? Okay, so the type of person that's going to say that it's morally wrong or unethical to use an emulator and download games because you're taking away money from the developer, or it's such a stupid argument. I mean, I don't hear anyone, you know, complaining that these old stories that end up in the free domain, that you can just do whatever you want with them. A lot of these games, not all of them, but a lot of them, these companies are defunct. There's nobody to cheat out of money anymore. So I never really fell into that category as being one of those type of people. So that argument never really made much sense to me. I'm not saying that it's, you know, apples to apples of a comparison, but it is sort of similar. Furthermore, I'd say that a lot of times when I hear someone saying that, I often find that these people at one time or another used emulators, and they'll tell you so admittedly. And you know that it's really easy, you know, to say don't use emulators because A, B, and C, when they had completely forgotten about their video games, or whatever reason. But the thing that got them back into video games was the sudden emergence, 98, 99, whenever people were finding these emulators for the first time and installing them in their computers and using them. They got into them, and maybe that's what got them back into games. It's what caused this resurgence in wanting to play retro video games again. To me, fucking helicopter passing. Fucking every time I make a video, that's what happens. But, the fuck was I saying? I find emulators are partly responsible for a lot of people getting back into games. Not me personally, although I did use them before I kind of got back into games, but for me personally, it was iPad shooters that started getting me back into old games. But how many people, how many YouTubers that make videos about video games playing on emulators is what got them to think to themselves, what games did I miss out on? Look at all these games that I missed out on. I want to go hunt all these down. I mean, certainly there are a lot of people that would check that box off on their list as definitely played a hand in me starting to hunt down old games. Period. Let me just touch upon one thing that you bring up in your video really quickly. Not all, and maybe you're not saying that exactly, but this isn't really, I guess, towards you personally. Just, I need to make this statement myself. Not all resellers are bereft of any sort of integrity, and they're all resellers are these scumbag, fucking greedy, pocket picking, individuals. Some of these people, like Greg Honeycutt, for example, these sort of people have a knowledge of video games, and they're not just in it for the money. A lot of them give people good deals and open them to the possibility of getting that console that otherwise was way too expensive for them to ever be able to afford, and now they can get all these games. So just putting this out there, not every reseller is a person like that, and I find that they have a reputation for being so. You say the word reseller and you're the fucking worst person in the world for gaming, and that's not always the case. Now this next thing you bring up, you're talking about some of these people that exclusively play on the authentic consoles, and they buy their games for these consoles, and driving up the prices of old games. I don't understand this argument, because no matter what, eventually we were gonna see an uptick in the collectability of video games. I mean, I used to collect comics, and I did so for years and years, and I can tell you, going to a vast amount of different comic shops and meeting different comic book collectors, there was no sense of these people suck because they're driving up the price of comics or whatever, unless you were talking about scalpers, that were trying to hoard comics or whatever. You didn't really hear talk about that, because everyone understood that you were going to have comics that were harder to find that sold in a limited amount or whatever. People just understood that collecting for this medium. I mean, you'd hear sometimes like, it sucks that Marvel's releasing, 10 different covers of this one issue just so we all go out and collect them all or whatever, but no one was like trying to shame the collector for collecting games. About the only thing I can think of that would shame the actual collector was doing something like talking about grading comics. If you brought up grading comics, then people would say, how do you put your trust in, some company, some guy working for a company that's gonna say, well, it's definitely in this position. What makes these guys an authority on this position, this sort of condition? It doesn't make any sense. And if you're a comic collector, what use does a comic have to you? If it's sealed in this plastic that you can't even open unless you break it. That's not what comic collecting is about. That's about semantically the only sort of thing I can think of that even comes close to relating to the fucking vast array of different things that collectors are shamed for in the gaming community. I find it turns a lot of people off from this community. You have so many different things that people just shit down your fucking throat for, that it's like, I just wanted to fucking play games. I just wanted to get some fucking games and play some games and have some community with that or whatever. I mean, believe what you want, think what you want. I'm not saying any of that, but I mean, games, the price of games going up was, to me, inevitable. It was an inevitable thing that these were going to become collectible and all of that shit. It was just fucking inevitable. And another thing is, some of us are collectors, some of us are gamers, some of us mix collecting with gaming. Some of us even mix collecting games, being a gamer, and collecting memorabilia of games, of the video game companies. So, I mean, the thing with collecting is some of these things are worth money, and either you're gonna suck it up and pay the prices, or you're not. You don't. I mean, everybody chooses what their interests are. If your interest is being a gamer only and not the collector side, then fine. I'm not gonna fault you for being just a gamer and not a collector per se. But it's kind of a dick move to be like, well, I'm gonna game, and that's what you should do too. You shouldn't collect. That's dumb or whatever. I mean, everybody does what they want to do. Some people want to fucking take a fucking $25,000 loan out for that fucking boat or that fucking four-wheeler to go hunting or whatever. People do what they want to do, man. Alright, so one of the next things you bring up in your video is authentic playing versus emulation playing. Like the sort of purist that's going to say, I prefer playing on the authentic console rather than the emulator, because on the authentic console I get a vastly superior experience. And I fall into this category. Now, in my opinion, I don't even think it's in my opinion, okay? You bring up the worst example, which is the NES, to try and lend credibility to your argument. Because the NES, if you think that emulating the NES is a vastly superior experience than playing it on an authentic NES, then I challenge you. I seriously challenge you to emulate Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Emulate Mike Tyson's Punch-Out with a RetroPie. Do it with a brand new RetroPie 3, whatever. I don't care if it's a 3, a 0. I don't care if it's a PSP you're playing with. As long as you're playing with an HD TV, which is what most people are going to be playing with an emulator nowadays, even back in the day, but whatever. Play through an HDMI port, play on, your HD TV, and beat Mike Tyson with no sort of problems or anything. Go ahead and beat the whole game. Do like a run through of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I'd like to see that, because if you want to beat certain games on the NES especially, you might want to have a old school CRT setup so you can actually play the way the game is meant to be played, and you don't have to worry about any sort of lag whatsoever. And this is coming from a person that has the AVS and the Super NT, which they're not emulation, it's so-called simulation, so there is very, very minimal, if any, lag. The lag would come from your TV, and there's still a little bit of difference on that versus a CRT when you go to fight Tyson or Super Macho Man, or any of the harder enemies in Punch-Out. But really, Tyson is the biggest way to tell the difference between an emulator, a simulator, and the authentic NES on a CRT TV. The big, huge difference is the CRT TV. And then you bringing up, putting the cartridge in the toaster style Nintendo. And I think if someone is making the argument that they prefer the authentic experience on the NES, I don't think this type of person is having the type of problems that you're talking about. Now, maybe the type of person that's emulating may have this problem transitioning to the authentic experience because they don't know any better. Like you said in your video, not everyone can be, I forget the word you used or whatever, but not everyone can be, this all knowledgeable fucking electronics engineer or whatever, however you put it. So I understand that on that side, but the person that's saying this is going to, for example, maybe not even have the original toaster. They have the Toploader because it has a superior 72-pin connector that doesn't ever really fail the way the original model does. I mean, you pretty much get a Toploader, you get it modded for whatever video source you want, you get it modded, and then you're done. Because, in America, I don't know how it is. I know how it is in Japan. The Toploader in Japan, not the original Famicom, but it's called the AV Famicom, at least that's what people refer to it, has the multi-out from the Super Nintendo. That's the port they have there. But I don't know what it's like as far as the Toploader, the PAL version Toploader. But in America, the Toploader only had RF out, so you have to, over here, you have to mod it to get composite or whatever other video signal you would want out of it. But I would say the console, purist, that's what they would do. They wouldn't be having these issues. So me personally, that's where I fall on it. On my channel, I like to take these harder games and try and beat them, because some of these games, it's just this mountain that I try and climb by beating some of these games, and a lot of times it lags on an HD TV. It's a wholly different experience on a CRT. It just is. But at the same time, I'm saying that I'm not in any way dogging anyone else that prefers to play it another way. And I will grant you that I have noticed in emulating certain systems that I do find there are certain systems that you can benefit from emulating and sort of have a better experience. One thing is loading times, and sometimes slowdown in certain games. The games just perform better being emulated than they do on the consoles themselves. So I'm with you. I'm in agreement on some of those things. But the bringing up the NES, man, that was probably the worst system you could have brought up to sort of argue for. So here's where you get into some of the different types of emulation systems that you use and you like and whatever. Me personally, I've always been partial to the PSP, a Xbox Media Center, the original Xbox, hooked up with, I mean, I had at one point, I want to say it was like 19,000 different arcade games running through MAME on there, with all the other systems, the Game Gear, everything. I've also got my Wii homebrewed and hooked up with all sorts of emulators. I've got a RetroPie 3 that I have set up with all sorts of emulators, and I finally broke down and got all the PC Engine and Sega CD games and the BIOS and all running up and all of that shit. So I'm really with you on emulation. You know, it's sort of like, I just like games, man. I just like games, whether I'm emulating them, and you know, it depends on the system. But a lot of times I'm using emulation to find new games. Especially, like, I'll download the entire Famicom library, and I'll just start going down the list of the fucking 1,000 games they have over there. I'll start going down the list and, you know, deleting them as I try them and I don't care for them, or I recognize the game as this or that. I'll delete the ROM off, and then when I find a game, I'll write it down in a little list that I have of Famicom games to import. You know, and that's something I might do maybe once a year for a couple hours, and then I'll have a list for that year of 30 games to try and import over the course of a year. You know, stuff like that. I use emulators for stuff like that all the time. So, at the end of the day, that's my thoughts. It's not really, you know, me trying to, ooh, let's fucking fight, me and you, Top Hat Gaming Man. You know, you fucking bitch, and SJW get triggered, and I'm triggered, and let's all be triggered together. But I do find that there's way too much of the sentiment of, I'm on my team, and if you say this word, you know, then that automatically, I perceive that as you're my enemy, or whatever, because you have this opinion, and get on my team for this politician, or you're this or that, or whatever. Whether it's politics or even fucking video games, you have this same fucking mentality. I don't fucking understand it. People need to just calm the fuck down. Have a fucking good time. Enjoy some games. You know, for example. If games are not your thing, maybe guitar's your thing. I happen to enjoy both of them. pick up a guitar and fucking play a guitar. Everybody just chill the fuck out and, like, have fun. You know, we only get one of these fucking lives. Let's try to have fucking fun with it. But that's gonna do it for me. This is Trevor over Toploaded Gaming. See you fucking next time.